in the last class? Who can remind us what we saw in the last class, please? Who can remind us what we saw in the last class? Are we there?
Hi, sir. Good evening. My name is Sono Akule Simon. This is my first time here, so I don't really know what you guys did last class.
Okay, Mr. Simon, you're welcome. You're a new student?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Kindly do well to access the recorded sessions of the last classes so that you can be able to catch up given the fact that exams are fast approaching.
I'll do just that,
So
sir.
that we'll be on the same page.
Okay, sir.
The IT expert in the group can be of help with that. They can share with you the links to the previous lessons so that you can follow through.
Oh, yes, sir. I already have the link. I will study it later after this lesson.
All right, great. Okay, what about the others? Please let us know what you remember from our last class.
Okay. So last class we looked at other macroeconomic objectives, and the ones that we looked at, we saw price stability and yes, was price price stability, and we saw balance of payment. Yes, balance of payment surplus, balance of payment deficit. So
Yeah,
we're saying that
what did we say about that?
yes, we're saying that price stability is when the government tries to reduce probably inflation in order to be able to distribute like to achieve a balance in within between the poor and the rich. Yes, to achieve probably not really a balance, but to reduce the gap between the poor and the rich. So,
Okay, I
and
think
we saw.
Aren't you explaining equitable distribution of income rather?
mm,
Hello.
Yes, aren't you explaining rather equitable distribution of income? Okay, first of all, you got it right. The fact that we studied macroeconomic objectives in the last class. However, you seem to not have gone through your notes again, and that is a problem when we come for class without revisiting our notes. Or I don't know if you take down notes when lectures are going on, because it makes sense for you to revisit your notes so that you're coming in with a foundation of what was handled in the last class, because what we are going to handle today is going to be a flow, a continuation from where we stopped. So it makes sense. It's important to always do that. So yes, we looked at macroeconomic objectives and we saw macroeconomic objectives like economic growth, price stability, full employment, balance of payment equilibrium, equitable distribution of income, and environmental protection. We went detailedly into looking at each of these elements, what they are, how they can be achieved, and we also we looked at them in depth. We explained that price stability was the government trying to avoid a situation of inflation, right? Trying to maintain prices at around equilibrium. We also said that what you were explaining was equitable distribution of income, trying to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor. That was Madam Thelma, right?
Yes, and based on it, I don't know why you're saying that is not, but from the explanation of last class, I got that it was also trying to reduce the gap between the poor and the rich. So maybe I missed out on some of the things that you said in the last
Or
class.
maybe you're explaining a point in isolation, which so you have to connect your point, right? We may have explained that, but linking to a point. So when you give it linked, it's better understood. But when you give the point in isolation, it becomes difficult to understand what exactly you're saying. All right, let's move forward today. We're already 30 minutes into the time of today's class. And just to let you know that we might have a couple of catch-up classes so that we can move a little faster. So we might have more classes this month, given that your exams are scheduled for the first week of next month. And I'll also be giving an assignment after the class of tomorrow. I'm sure you saw on the timetable that we have another class tomorrow. So after the class of tomorrow, I'll be giving an assignment which is going to count as your continuous assessment. All right, today we're going to be looking at inflation alongside unemployment and fiscal and monetary policies. We've overemphasized the concepts of inflation and unemployment so far, so we're just going to be discussing them. So what do we understand by inflation? I know you're seeing my screen, but let me hear from you.
So I think inflation is the rapid increase in prices of goods and services over a short period of time.
Okay, is that Mr. Simon talking? Okay, yes.
Yes.
All right. Yes, inflation is a rapid increase in the general price level. It's always important to mention the fact that it is an increase in the general price level of goods and services over a period of time. Because the reason is because um, if we have the prices of maybe a few goods rising persistently over a given period of time, it's not necessarily inflation, but inflation has to do with the entire economy. So it's the general price level that is rising, which means that the prices of goods and services across different sectors are rising simultaneously in a persistent or consistent way over a given period of time, then we can qualify it as inflation. But maybe if we go to the market and there is an increase in the price of shoes, or there's an increase in the price of dresses, and maybe consistently for a month or 6 months or a year, if that is the only product whose price is increasing in the market, then we cannot qualify it as inflation. So inflation is a rapid increase, a continuous increase in the general price level of goods and services within an economy. Thank you very much, Mr. Simon, for that contribution. All right, what are
All
the
right,
various
so
types
I
of...
just want to ask that in a situation like Cameroon right now, what we are facing, can we say Cameroon is facing inflation?
Yes, of course, Cameroon is facing inflation. Serious one at that.
Because when you go to the market, all the price of all goods have increased. There's no goods left behind,
Yes,
and housewives are really
yes,
frustrated.
exactly. It's across different sectors. Cameroon has been experiencing inflation for the past more than 10 years. Inflation has been on the rise, and it's still going to happen. So those are some of the things that you should watch out for as an executive, because also in your exams, this is me now leaking out what one of the things you should be expecting in your exams. In your exams, I'm going to require you to show me how you can apply the concepts we've been studying, because this is macroeconomics and this is MBA level. It's more about practical application of the concepts, not about theory. So all what we've been looking at and what we are going to look at in the next couple of classes are geared towards helping you be able to look at the economy as a whole and be able to diagnose the problems that the economy is facing at a macroeconomic level, and beyond that be able to propose solutions based on your understanding of the concepts that we are studying. For example, we studied macroeconomic objectives. Now, when you listen to the news and you see the objectives that the Minister of Health is pursuing, the Minister of Transport, and various ministers across different sectors in Cameroon are pursuing, what can you deduce are the macroeconomic objectives the government of Cameroon is trying to achieve in the year 2026? What policies have they put in place, or what policies can they put in place to be able to achieve those macroeconomic objectives? How is it going to affect the economy? How is it going to affect different sectors of the economy? How will each policy affect the economy? Remember, we saw all of those things in the previous class. So yes, Cameroon is facing inflation. Cameroon is facing inflation, and that inflation is going to continue. So what types of inflation do you know of? Let's discuss the different types of inflation.
So I think there's hyperinflation.
Yes, there is hyperinflation. Thank you. What do you understand by hyperinflation?
I think hyperinflation is when there's a drastic increase in the general prices of goods and services.
Yes, when there is an extreme, rapid, and out of control increase in the price of goods and services in the general price level in an economy over a short period of time. So hyperinflation is characterized by very fast increases in the general price level. The purchasing power of money collapses very, very much, and people usually need high or huge amounts of money to be as cash to be able to buy basic goods. In fact, when an economy is facing a situation of hyperinflation, savings become almost useless, because imagine putting 5 million in the bank today as savings, and maybe after a week or two, the same 5 million you put in the bank is now worth only 2 million of goods, meaning that 5 million you put in the bank today, after a week, is able to buy goods worth only 2 million. So it becomes a problem. Let's give a mathematical illustration. So you save 5 million in the bank today, and a bag of cement is 5,000 francs, meaning that with your 5 million francs which you have saved in the bank, you could buy 1,000 bags of cement today. But now you carry your money and you save in the bank, and inflation occurs, and you come after 2 weeks or a week, and the price of a bag of cement is no longer 5,000 francs. The price of a bag of cement is now 8,000 francs. Now you can only buy 625 bags of cement. That is hyperinflation. Now, who can give me an example of a situation where we faced hyperinflation in the real world, a real world situation where we faced hyperinflation?
I think it happened recently in the Venezuelan economy.
Okay.
I think the price of oil, I don't really know what happened. I still need to study the cause of that, but it happened recently. So I think that's a hyperinflation.
Okay, so now executives know that that is something they might want to study to know what caused it, what happened, what caused it, and what measures have the government put in place to be able to curb or to mitigate that situation, right?
Yes, sir.
So that's how as executives we are supposed to analyze concepts. For example, when you follow the news and you hear that there has been hyperinflation occurring in so and so country, the next thing you might want to pay attention to, the is the measures, the actions that the government is putting in place, is undertaking to be able to solve that problem of um, of hyperinflation. Now you can begin to see how those policies or those action steps taken by the government align with the lessons that you learn in class. You begin to see how it is being applied practically in the real world. Okay, what's the African country with the weakest dollar? What's the African country with the weakest dollar?
So is it Zimbabwe?
Yeah, exactly. Now, who can explain to us what happened before the Zimbabwean dollar fell so hard like that?
I think a lot of sanctions from the US government. Um, yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I got distracted there. Yes, you mentioned a lot of sanctions from the US government. What was the main reason? What was the main reason behind the collapse of the Zimbabwean dollar?
So I have no idea.
It's what we are discussing in today's class, hyperinflation. So in Zimbabwe, you should go and research this. Everyone should take it upon themselves to research this. So Zimbabwe faced a situation of hyperinflation, and Zimbabwe actually is the only country that had up to $5 million or $100,000 as a note, as a single note. $1 million as a single note, because Zimbabwe faced a hyperinflation. In fact, it was one of the scariest inflations the world has ever seen, where you buy a loaf of bread and after 2 hours, the price hikes were happening in hours and minutes. You buy a loaf of bread, and before you know it, after some minutes, the price of the same loaf of bread is 20 times higher than the initial price. You buy a car today for maybe 5 million, and after a few hours, the same car is worth 25 million, 5 times the price. The inflation was terrible. The government had to resort to printing, had to resort to an unusual policy because people could not cope. The government had to start printing dollars with high value. Imagine buying a loaf of bread for 200,000. Imagine buying spaghetti for 400, 500,000. And then imagine having to carry the money in a bag to go and buy spaghetti, or imagine having to carry money in a truck to go to the market to purchase few goods. So it was the situation with inflation there, the inflationary situation there was so terrible that the government had to resort to start printing money with high face values. The nominal values were very, very low, of course. The intrinsic values were very, very low, but the face values very, very high. The government had to start printing $100,000 notes, $1 million notes, $5 million notes, just so that people could cope. Now, I was just trying to paint to us a real world situation of hyperinflation, just like the executive mentioned the example of Venezuela, which I recommend that we also follow the news or do some research to be able to understand some of the causes of this inflation in Venezuela. Now, let us look at some of the types of inflation. We mentioned hyperinflation, but now what are some of the causes? What are some of those things that can cause inflation? We have demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and built-in inflation. Now, could the situation in Venezuela be as a result of demand pull inflation, or could it be cost push inflation? This is a question that you only be able to answer by studying the case, by studying the case, right? When you do a case study of Venezuela's inflationary situation, then you can understand the cause of their inflation, whether it is demand pull inflation or it is a cost push inflation. If it is demand pull inflation, what caused the demand pull inflation? If it is cost push inflation, what caused it? So let us look at demand pull inflation. What do you understand by demand pull inflation?
I think it's a condition whereby the demand for goods and services exceed the supply for those services and goods. So suppliers get greedy, they increase the price because the demand is higher, of course.
Awesome. Awesome. Now, demand pull inflation is like I have just one student in this class. My goodness. What's happening to Mr. Ngome Diabe? You're welcome. I'll start greeting you for one after the other. Madam Joy, you're welcome to class. Mr. Nkede, you're welcome to class. Please, you should participate. Class participation counts. It's part of your evaluation. Okay. Someone raised their hand? Okay, no. All right. So demand pull inflation is a situation is a situation where inflation is caused by excessive demand for goods and services over supply. Excessive demand for goods and services over supply. Now, what can cause the demand for goods and services to be excessive, far high above available supply? Someone else should talk. Remember, I said MBA classes were supposed to be discussing. It's not supposed to be me coming to pour out knowledge. We're supposed to be discussing concepts.
In an event of war.
In an event of war. Okay,
Yes,
can you explain?
Demand.
Can you explain?
Okay, for instance, recently, even in Cameroon, we realized that when the issue in Douala occurred, where people were fighting and places were shut down, there was no circulation of gas in Bamenda. So due to that war there, we could not get enough supply of gas here in Bamenda. Which caused the price to yes, sir.
Okay, which caused the price to skyrocket. Okay, practically, thank you for that contribution. However, practically, that is more a situation of, yes, it applies, but that wasn't inflation. That was those were price hikes, right? Black market situation. That was a typical example of black market situation. Price hikes or built-in inflation, which we are going to see now. When we are going to explain the demand pull inflation, cost push, and built-in inflation, we are going to understand carefully or clearly where each element fits. So demand pull inflation is inflation that happens when the total demand in an economy is greater than the total supply, which means that there is too much money in the economy chasing fewer goods. Now, how does demand pull inflation happen? How does it occur? Demand increases faster than the economy can produce goods and services to meet this demand. And this can be caused by increased consumer spending. For example, consumer expenditure keeps increasing consumer expenditure keeps increasing, but the production of goods and services is not increasing in a rate commensurate to the increase in demand. Now, we also have higher government spending. For example, when the government gets to budget for a deficit, meaning that government expenditure increases while government taxes falls, like we're going to look at fiscal policies later in this class, there is a lot of money pumped into the economy. So people have money, but if the supply or if the production of goods and services are not increasing commensurate to the level at which people have money to spend, then demand becomes excessive over supply, which could lead to the prices of goods and services increasing. We also have a situation of increased investment by firms. Increased investment by firms and increased exports. Now, let's say firms increase their investment and export increases. Companies are now focused on exporting their goods, maybe because the value, maybe because there is a revaluation of the currency, or there is a currency appreciation. Remember when we talked about balance of payments, we saw how the balance of payment situation, whether deficit or surplus, affects the economy and how it can cause retaliation because the balance of payment surplus affects, or deficit affects, the appreciation or depreciation of the currency. Now let us say that there is a balance of payment surplus, and so there is a currency appreciation. Home producers or home industries become interested in selling more of their products because there is a currency appreciation. They become interested in exporting more of their products. So if exports increases, what happens? Local supply falls, because if suppliers are producing more and supplying outside the country, exporting outside the country, we now have less goods to consume within the country, and consequently demand can increase above the available quantity of goods and services available for consumption. Now, we also have the fact that if the availability of credits is high, meaning that people can easily obtain loans from the bank, the interest rates are very low or are very, very affordable, people now have money to spend. People have money to spend. And if goods and services are not available, then demand pull inflation sets in. So key characteristics of demand pull inflation. Demand pull inflation occurs mostly when the economy is near full employment. Now pay attention, because at the end of this concept, you should be able to tell us whether Cameroon is facing inflation, yes, but is the inflation demand pull inflation, or is it cost
And
push
so
inflation or
is
built-in
that is just
inflation?
so that's just the question I want to ask, because I've been searching my mind and I'm looking like asking questions. Is Cameroon actually going through demand pull inflation? And I'll say
So
no.
we explain the three types of inflation, then you will tell us what you think, right? What you think, whether Cameroon is facing a demand pull inflation, cost push, or built-in inflation. So remember that demand pull inflation occurs when the economy is near full employment, meaning that there is enough money in the economy. People are rich. People are rich, people are wealthy, there's enough money in the economy, and rather people do not have enough, there are not enough goods and services for people to spend this money on. So the average household is rich. The average household has money to spend. If the government increases its spending, meaning it's pumping money into the economy, the government cuts taxes, people are paying less money to the government as taxes, it increases disposable income. Consumers have more disposable income, demand for goods and services are increasing. Factories cannot increase output quickly. If factories cannot increase their output quickly to be able to match up with the increasing demand, then price increases set in, demand pull inflation comes in. Is the concept of demand pull inflation clear? Is the concept of
It's
demand
clear,
pull
sir.
inflation clear?
It's clear, sir.
Yes, sir.
All right, now let us look at cost push inflation, which is another type of inflation, cost push inflation. I've not written on the board today. I don't feel good. All right. So let us look at cost push inflation. Cost push inflation occurs when the cost of production for firms increases, causing businesses to raise their prices in order to maintain profits. Meaning that prices rise because production becomes more and more expensive, not because demand is increasing. For example, at Jewel and Clifford Transit, where I'm managing, when the government increases custom duties on containers, on goods imported from China and other countries, like they have done this January, in fact, between November and this January, what happens? Maybe before you could spend, say, 16 million francs for custom clearance and handling charges for a 40-feet container. You could spend maybe 15.5 to 16 million francs. Now, as a result of increase in custom duties, maybe now instead of 16 million, you're spending, say, 18 million, 18.5 million to clear the same container. What happens? The owner of the goods, let me explain the multiplier effect, how it relates. As a company, we are definitely going to increase the prices at which we offer CBM of goods to clients who are importing from China. So maybe we used to offer give out a CBM at 300,000. But now, as a result of increase in custom duties, as a company now, we will give out a CBM of goods at 330,000 or 340,000 francs per CBM. Now, these people who are importing are maybe producers or local sellers in Cameroon. They have imported raw materials or they have imported goods to resale in Cameroon. A CBM used to be 300,000 francs that they will pay. Now they pay a CBM for, say, 330,000 francs. Cost is increasing also. When they eventually pay for their goods and collect, what happens to their prices when they are selling now to Cameroonians in the market? Definitely the price increases. Has the price increased because of an increase in demand? No. The price has increased because of an increase in cost of production. So that if this happens at a general level, then it becomes cost push inflation. So when firms face higher costs, they pass this cost on to consumers in the form of higher prices. Common cases include higher wages. For example, if the wages are rising faster than productivity, maybe as a result of strong work unions. Let's say we have trade unions, work trade unions that are very, very strong and they are negotiating for high salaries. What happens? Companies begin to increase salaries, and if this increase in salaries are not met by corresponding increase in productivity, what will happen? The company will definitely find a way to recover that money. Because everything being equal, now this is just basic knowledge. Everything being equal, if a company is paying you, say, 300,000 francs, it means that your productivity should be maybe 900 should be worth 900,000 francs or even 1.5 million francs. The least the company will pay you only one third or 1/5 of what you are generating for the company, of the value you're generating for the company. So there is always supposed to be a value match. If the salary of workers increases and productivity does not increase to be able to match the increase in salary, maybe as a result of strong workers trade unions, we have increased salaries to up to 2 million francs across the company. But now productivity has not increased for us to be able to recover that 2 million francs. What will happen? We'll increase our prices in order to catch up or in order to recover the 2 million francs that has been spent on increase in wages. So you see, our prices are increasing as a result of increase in cost, not as a result of increase in demand. Also, increase in the prices of raw materials. Every day, the prices of fuel is increasing. The price of gas is increasing. The price of food is increasing. The price of cocoa, rubber, coffee, everything is increasing. As a result, so if you're producing, say, chocolates, and the price of cocoa keeps increasing, the price of other raw materials used in the production of chocolates keep increasing, what happens? As a supplier or a producer, you're going to increase your prices to be able to meet up with the rising cost. That becomes cost push inflation. If we also have increase in government taxes, like what the Cameroon government has a PhD in doing, every day you hear new taxes. The government of Cameroon has 1,000,001 ways of raising money through taxes. In fact, what we are waiting for is the day they will levy us taxes on the air that we are breathing, which God has given us. Because every day the government of Cameroon has new taxes they introduce. When these taxes keep increasing, what happens? Producers transfer these taxes, these high taxes, to the final consumer. How? Through high prices. Because when we levy indirect taxes on governments, value added tax, imagine how much companies pay as value added tax. Imagine how much companies pay as excise duties. It is enormous. These companies tend to transfer these taxes in the form of high prices. Also, we have currency depreciation, which makes imports to become more expensive. We have supply shocks. For example, natural disasters. Imagine the sugar plantation in Banjok. Imagine it catches fire. I think an incident like that happened. Was it in Cameroon? Madam Maureen, maybe you can help me on this. There was an incident. I don't know if it happened in Cameroon, where a sugarcane plantation was. Yes, it was in Cameroon. I think 2 years ago, a sugarcane plantation burnt down, and we lost about how many billions within 24 hours. The company lost billions within 24 hours. What happened? In less than no time, the price of sugar escalated in the market. What was it? Because of increase in demand for sugar? No, it was a supply shock. It's called shocks in supply. When we have natural disasters, wars, pandemics, maybe there is a war and they bomb down a plantation, they bomb down some production units, and so cost of production increases. Because now the companies have to recover that money that has been lost. That was investment. The companies have to recover that money. How do they recover it? By levying higher prices, by charging higher prices. So now that is cost push inflation. So cost push inflation can occur even when demand is weak. Cost push inflation can occur even when demand is weak. It leads to stagflation, that is inflation plus unemployment. Imagine a situation where the prices are continuously on the rise, but there is unemployment. People do not have money to spend on goods and services. There is high level of unemployment, yet the prices of goods and services continue to increase. That is called stagflation, and that is a common consequence of cost push inflation. So firms raise prices to cover higher costs, not because demand is rising. Examples, we have oil prices rising, we have transport and production costs increasing, we have firms increasing, firms now tend to increase their prices for goods and services. Inflation rises even though consumers' demand tends to fall. Now, based on your understanding, do you think that Cameroon is experiencing demand pull inflation or cost push inflation? Are we in class? Do we think Cameroon is experiencing demand pull inflation or cost push inflation?
I think cost push inflation.
I think cost push
Okay.
inflation, sir.
I also think cost push inflation.
Okay. All right. Cameroon is definitely experiencing cost push inflation. Like we can see the characteristics. Cost push inflation occurs when prices are increasing. Not are Cameroonians getting richer or poorer? Definitely Cameroonians are getting poorer.
They're
Standard of
getting
living
poorer.
keeps falling. Is unemployment reducing or increasing? Unemployment is rather increasing.
It's increasing.
So people have less and less money. So it is not because demand is increasing. People even have less and less money to buy goods and services. But rather prices are increasing. It's because it's not related to demand. It's rather related to increase in cost. Now, practically, do we see, okay, look at these companies that depend on fuel for production, companies that depend on electricity for production, companies that rely heavily on transport infrastructure for production, companies that incur high level of transport costs to be able to deliver their products or services. Cost keeps increasing. Now, you who are doing MBAs, maybe after your MBA, if you want to transition from your job to another job, maybe say you're earning a current salary of 300,000 francs, you start targeting a salary of 500,000 francs, and you're qualified. The companies wanting to pay you, that's increase in wages, not so. Yes, or maybe you're working in a company, you obtain your MBA or your doctorate, and then you want an increase in salary because you want a salary that matches your level, your academic qualifications, and the skill contribution you're bringing to the company. Now, on average, cost keeps increasing, whether it is as a result of increase in salaries, government taxes too. Government is not taking it easy too with taxes. The government taxes keeps increasing. Raw material prices are increasing, so we are definitely facing a situation of cost push inflation. Now, what is built-in inflation? Who can tell us what built-in inflation is? I'm going to go a little faster from here. Who can tell us what built-in inflation is?
So I don't really know. I think it's when citizens of the country ask for higher wages, higher salaries.
Okay, can you explain? You're on track. I just need you to expatiate on your idea.
So I think what happens is that when people start asking for higher wages, employers also kind of increase the prices of their goods and services in order to be able to pay these salaries.
Okay. Now, thank you very much for that contribution. There is an important element that you have to add to that to make it complete. So I'm going to ask you the question, why do workers, because remember we have mentioned the point of workers asking for increase in wages when we explain cost push inflation, right? Now, what makes it different when we are talking about built-in inflation? Increase in wages can cause cost push inflation, but now increase in wages also causes built-in inflation. But what makes the difference? Why do we call it built-in inflation? So the question I'm asking you is, why do workers ask for increase in salaries? If you can answer that question, then we have built-in inflation.
I think the most prominent reason is because of increase in the cost of living.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now, if we have a situation where workers are demanding for increase in salaries as a result of general increase in the cost of living, we are looking at cost push inflation. All right. Now, the primary reason that accounts for built-in inflation is expectations of future increase in prices. Expectation of future increase in prices. Now let me explain. Workers, people, we are experiencing inflation, and then people foresee, maybe based on economic trends, people foresee that in the next 6 months, in the next 1 year, inflation is going to be on rampage. Inflation is going to be high. So workers start asking for higher salaries now so that it can prepare them for the situation of inflation. It can prepare them against the situation of inflation. Meaning workers foresee that in the nearest future, the prices of the general price level for goods and services will be increasing consistently. So they don't want to wait to be in the situation of inflation before they start suffering lower standard of living. They want to proactively solve the problem by demanding for higher wages, so that eventually when prices are increasing, their salaries are already high, to be able to match up with the increased prices of goods and services in the market. Are we following? So built-in inflation is caused when wage prices inflate. When workers persist, when there is a persistent demand of increased wages on the part of workers as a result of predicted inflation. So companies now, or businesses, begin to increase their prices in order to do what? In order to meet up with the increase in the wages paid to workers. So workers demand high
I
wages
just
in
want to
order to
ask
maintain their purchasing power. Yes, question, Madam Maureen, you have a question?
that it means that built-in inflation has to do with the population. That's what I
Yes,
want to know. Meaning that at one point in time, they're demanding more salary in order to meet up with their demand, if I'm
yes,
getting it right.
yes. So to buttress more on that question, a situation of built-in inflation can cause a wage spiral, a wage price spiral. Do we know what that is? It's a situation where workers foresee that prices, the general price level, will increase in the near future. So what do? They demand for higher wages now in order to maintain their purchasing power when prices finally increase. Now, the companies pay the increase in salaries, and what happens to the cost of production of the companies? The cost of production increases. When the cost of production increases, what happens to the prices of goods and services offered by these companies? Prices of goods and services increase. Not so. When the prices of goods and services increase, the workers, would they be comfortable with the increase in price of goods and services? No. They will definitely want more salary to be able to meet up with this continuously increasing prices of goods and services. So what happens? It becomes a circle. That's what is called a wage price spiral. So the workers demand higher wages, the companies grant, cost of production increases, they increase price in order to meet up with the high cost of production. Prices now are high. The workers again demand for increase in salary, and then the same cycle continues and continues. It becomes a wage price spiral. All right, can we look at the next concept? Any question? Let's look at unemployment. I'm going to be very fast. We have less than 1 hour. Any questions? Is Mr. Ngome Diabe in this class? Nathan Angel. You should come and text that name again. Can you not change this name? He says that is his social media name. Please make your contributions. Any question?
No, not question, sir, but I want to say it's typically the built-in inflation is typically what we are facing most at times because we earn maybe a 200,000 some 3 years back. Later, like 2, 3 years later, we are asking for more wages, and the cycle just keep rising. Today, I find myself struggling with even an increased salary, and I'm
Yes,
currently
yes.
asking for an increase again.
Exactly, exactly. Now, as executives, we should be able to observe when we study concepts. Now, we have established that Cameroon is facing more of cost push inflation. Now, let us look at an economy like the US. Is the US experiencing more of cost push inflation, more of demand pull inflation, or more of built-in inflation? That's a probing question, a food for thought for you to go back and observe the US economy and look at it as a case study and analyze on if your conclusion is that the the US economy, because definitely almost all economies in the world are facing inflation, but now the inflations are controlled, the level of inflation is controlled. So, but on average, almost every economy in the world is facing inflation, and it's not going to stop. But then the level of inflation is being controlled. In the US, is it cost push inflation? They have more, or demand pull inflation, or built-in inflation? Why do you believe it is maybe demand pull inflation? On what grounds do you base your argument? All right, or is on what grounds do you base your arguments that it is built-in inflation or cost push inflation? That's how we should analyze concepts. All right, so we should think beyond the scope of our own local economy in Cameroon. All right, let us look at unemployment. What do we understand by unemployment?
I think it's a condition whereby people strong enough to work cannot find work.
Okay. All right. Let's add some flesh to that definition. But the concept, you're in line. In unemployment is a situation where people who are willing and able to work, because remember, when we are defining unemployment, if someone is willing to work but unable to work, we don't count that person when counting the unemployed, because the will is there, but the skill, the ability to work is not there, so we don't count it. Now, if someone has the ability to work, the willingness to work, but is not working because he's not willing to work, we also do not count it as unemployment. For example, I gave an example in one of our previous classes when we were discussing the concept of unemployment, and I said, based on natural causes, some career women have to stay at home because of natural causes. When they they give birth, they have to maybe stay at home for maybe a year. Some career women take even 5 years off or 6 years to have their children, nurture them, and then get back into work life. So within the 3 or 5 years, the lady in question has taken a break from work in order to raise her family, to make children and raise her family. If she is skilled, we will not count her as unemployed, because she is skilled, she's able to work, but is she willing to work? No, because she's chasing other priorities. So unemployment is when people who are, one, willing, two, able to work, are unable to find jobs, or have jobs but are below the minimum wage rate. For example, what's the minimum wage rate in Cameroon? Who can remind us what the minimum wage rate in Cameroon is?
I think it's 40,800.
40,800.
Thereabouts, yes, sir.
Okay. Now, so it means that anybody who is willing and able to work and is paid 35,000 in Cameroon is unemployed. All this, it's really crazy. It's crazy how you have a degree holder go and work for maybe a salary of 30,000, 35,000. It's crazy. This country is terrible. But those are some of the contextual realities we face, right? Those people are unemployed. Sometimes they're just doing it because they want to they want to fine tune their skill, they want to get busy and all that for various reasons,
I
but
want to
that's
ask a
that's
question.
unemployment.
When you have
Yes,
your
please.
certificates, but you can't find a job. That is unemployment, right?
If you're willing and able to work,
I'm
those are
willing and
yeah,
able to work. I have the skills.
but you
I
can't
have
find
all
a
the
job.
intelligence, but I can't find a job.
Yes, that's unemployment. Are we together?
We are together.
Yes. If you're willing, if you're qualified, for example, if you have a BSc in management and you have the competencies you have managerial competencies, you're willing to work, but you cannot find a job, then you're unemployed. But if you have those managerial competencies, you have the certificates and all, but you're not willing to work, then you're not unemployed. Or now, if you're willing to work, like many people who want to become top executives, but do not have any level of education, they do not have the competencies required for the job role, then they are not unemployed because they are very willing, but they cannot do the job if they are given. So they are not able to, so they are not unemployed.
So meaning that unemployment is only when you have the skills, you're willing to work, but you
Yes,
don't have the job.
yes,
That is unemployment.
exactly,
Salary, don't
exactly.
include salary inside. What if you're willing
I
and they give you the salary and you reject? Is that
I
unemployment?
mentioned I mentioned that unemployment is a situation when people who are willing and able to work cannot find jobs or have jobs but that are paid below the minimum wage rate. So if the minimum wage rate in Cameroon is 48,500, as someone said, if you have a job in Cameroon and you're paid 50,000, they will not count you as unemployed because you're paid above the minimum wage rate. The minimum wage rate is 48,500. So if you're paid 50,000 francs, you're not counted as unemployed. You are employed according to the Cameroon government. Is it understood? All right. What is frictional unemployment? We
Yes, sir.
explained frictional unemployment in one of our previous classes.
So I think it's when people are moving from job to job, or they are just entering the job market, something like that.
Yes. Frictional unemployment is uh, is a situation when it's a short-term unemployment situation that happens when people are between jobs or entering the workforce. Now, frictional unemployment is caused by workers leaving a job to find a better one, or new graduates that are searching for jobs for the first time, or people moving to a new location. For example, you're in you used to be in Douala, and you're moving to Yaoundé or to Bafoussam or to Ngaoundéré. Now you're leaving your job in Douala to this new location, and within a short period of time you're going to be unemployed because you have to look for a new job in your new location. That's frictional unemployment, so it is short term. Or we have a fresh graduate. You were not unemployed before, you were a student, and then you just graduated from school and you're looking for for a job, then that is frictional unemployment. So frictional unemployment is normal and is unavoidable in a healthy economy. No matter how buoyant the economy of a country is, you cannot avoid frictional unemployment. Why? Because you always have people moving out of school, fresh graduates, that's frictional unemployment. You always have people moving from relocating from one town or one region to another for various purposes, and will have to look for new jobs. That's frictional unemployment. Or you always have people who are maybe uncomfortable with their job and have to move to another job. Maybe you're on a job and you believe that your worth is 500,000 and the company is paying you only 300,000. They don't want to increase your salary and then you decide to quit. So as to look for another job that is going to match your skills, right? Or maybe you're looking for career prospects. You want to change your industry. Maybe you're in an industry that is into retail and you want to move to an industry that is into distribution or an industry that is into insurance, or for various reasons people want to move from one job to another. It's still frictional unemployment. Now, what is structural unemployment? Nathan Angel.
So this is a type of unemployment that is caused by technological changes.
Okay, technological changes. Yes. What else can you add to that?
Or maybe changes in the demand for goods and services.
Okay, the bottom line with structural unemployment is that it occurs when there is a mismatch between workers' skills and the available jobs. For example, you're in an area where they need more of nurses and you're a plumber. So can you do the job of a nurse? No, there is a skills mismatch, right? So you're unemployed because the jobs are available, but your skills do not align with the available jobs. So you remain unemployed. That's structural unemployment. Now, like you rightly mentioned in your first point, technological changes can cause structural unemployment. For example, automation, the use of AI and machines can cause structural unemployment. Let's say you were working for you were working in a rice plantation, in a rice farm, or in a coffee farm, in a coffee plantation, in a banana plantation, and the company decides to embrace technological changes and brings machines that are going to do maybe the plowing, the harvesting, and all that. Now, people lose their jobs, right? That's structural unemployment. Because what 500 people used to be required to do, now maybe, and they'll do it maybe within 2 weeks or 3 weeks, now 5 machines can come and get the job done in 2 days. So people lose their jobs. Now we also have the use of AI. We also have the introduction of AI, which is causing people to lose their jobs. We now have AI customer services. For example, a company we deal with transit, we do logistics from China to Cameroon, and one of the services we offer is procurement. Now we have agents in China who can go to the market, go to industries, and negotiate prices for the goods that clients want, and then we do quotations for the clients. However, there are some goods where we just have to buy on e-commerce platforms like Alibaba, 1688, Taobao, and DHgate and other e-commerce platforms. Now, on Alibaba, we have AI customer service and sales agents. You can't imagine how many people have lost their jobs because of the introduction of this AI. So you see a product on Alibaba and you're talking for hours and hours, asking questions, asking for pictures, videos of the product specifications, every question you may have to ask. And guess what? All the time, all the while, it's a machine responding to you. So imagine how many people who have lost their jobs as a result of that AI automation. No matter the question you ask, the AI is prompted, designed to talk like a human, to attend to your needs, to match the way you communicate. If you come and you text, hello, my friend, how are you doing today? And you send emojis, you communicate with emojis, the AI can mirror match your communication style to make you feel that you might talk with an AI for 2 days, 1 week without knowing that it's an AI you're talking with. Now, imagine such a disruptive innovation and how it affects the job market. So you see lots of people lose their jobs. That is structural unemployment. We also have changes in consumer demand, decline of certain industries. When certain industries tend to fall, certain industries tend to collapse, workers become jobless, or workers lacking new skills required. For example, accountants. No matter how qualified you are, in the next 5 years, we now have softwares that are AI, that have AI inbuilt. And if you cannot manipulate this AI, if you do not have knowledge of artificial intelligence, you lose your job. Now imagine even marketing jobs. There are so many job roles that are going to become highly competitive because of the introduction of new technologies. For example, in marketing, nowadays, before we knew only traditional or orthodox ways of doing marketing. But nowadays we have digital transformation. If you're a marketer and you do not understand digital marketing, you do not understand the algorithms of different digital platforms, you do not understand how to use artificial intelligence in marketing, then you hardly have a job in top companies, because basically they need you to upskill. So if you study traditional marketing or traditional management and you cannot use these advanced tools to incorporate them in your work to be able to meet up with current employers' needs, then you lose your job or you remain unemployed. So that is an example of structural unemployment. Okay, what do we understand by cyclical unemployment? What do we understand by cyclical unemployment? Mr. Nkede, are you in class? Please do well to participate. Mr. Ngome, your mic is unmuted. Can you make a contribution? Are we in class? Please indicate. It seems like
We're in
Yes,
class, sir.
sir, we are.
okay. All right. So cyclical unemployment, since no one is contributing, cyclical unemployment is caused by downturns in the business cycle, such as recessions. So if we have falling demand for goods and services, economic slowdown or recession, what happens? Companies start downsizing. Let's not go far. Who can give me a common example with mega corporations in Cameroon that have downsized and caused people to lose their jobs?
The CDC.
CDC. Thank you very much. I didn't want to call it myself. Okay. Who can give me another very good example? Who can give me another very good example? Sonara.
Yeah, I almost wanted to talk to them.
Yes. Sonara had to downsize, and in fact, these statistics are just from me, from my evaluation, but I think Sonara let go of almost 30% of its workers. Almost 30%, yes, of its workers. I'm still to get accurate figures, but if you do the research, you get it was crazy. Almost 30% of its workers. CGC as well. CGC losing workers every day. Either workers are resigning because of one problem or the other, unpaid salaries. Workers have stayed with the company for months and years. Salaries are not coming, or when they start coming, they come in bits and bytes, and they cannot enjoy it. So that's because the companies are facing downturns. Who can give me another very good example around urban areas? A very notable company that was used to keeping our towns clean. Now, major cities in Cameroon look more like dustbins.
Isakam.
Okay,
Isakam.
thank you. Okay. So you see, Isakam is a private company. Now look at how government decisions affect the economy. Isakam, this is a practical case study. Isakam is a privately held company. So they do public contracts. The government hires them or contracts them to keep the town clean. That's their major business. That's their business model. They get contracts from the government, from city councils to keep the nation clean. Now, contracts upon contracts, Isakam executes them, keeps pumping money into the company, growing the company, increasing the number of trucks, increasing staff across the national territory. But is the government paying their money? No, the government is not paying their money. So what happens? The government discovers that the debt they owe Isakam is too much, and they might run into serious problems with Isakam. So they start developing strategies to be able to manage the waste by themselves. And that is where we now see city councils having their own trucks, not so. Yes, because they saw that they thought that the money they were paying to Isakam was too much. They failed to understand how much investment Isakam put on ground to be able to perform the job. Now, I was going to get out of the explanation into a managerial concept, but maybe in the second semester when we are looking at a management course, we'll look at what I wanted to share. Now, there is a lot that Isakam had to
I
put
have
in
a
place.
worry.
Let me wrap up with the points, then you ask a question.
Okay.
So Isakam had a lot to put in place in order to carry out the job, to be able to deliver their value proposition. Now the government is trying to do the job Isakam was doing without a full, thorough understanding of how Isakam was able to deliver this value proposition. And now we have city councils with trucks here and there. Maintenance is zero. The level of unemployment has increased because when Isakam had to downsize, Isakam let go thousands of workers. It was on the news. Suddenly, Isakam was letting go workers on a daily because it had to downsize because contracts were no longer coming, and Isakam could not maintain these people on its payroll and keep paying them when the contracts are not coming. And now look at Isakam was employing more of young people, more of people that were within the viable force. So it was helping to reduce the dependency ratio of the country. So imagine that Isakam was employing 5,000 people, or let's say 7,000 people and 5,000 people, because basically their job is to keep the nation clean. So if they're having no contract, there's no need keeping workers. So imagine losing 5,000, letting go of 5,000 workers. Those are 5,000 people getting into the job market. It was crazy. That is an example of cyclical unemployment. I had to explain that so that you understand how companies can actually downsize. Now we have, imagine the number of people that Dangote Cement or Dangote is employing in Cameroon. And imagine if Dangote has to leave Cameroon, or if Dangote has to downsize and cut down on its operation by, let's say, 50%. I'm trying to prop your mind to see how far it can affect the economy. All right. Okay. I think Madam Thelma had a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, sir. My question is, what about these workers who were working with these NGOs and due to the aids that were being granted from the US and from out there, it was stopped, so they lost their jobs. How can we classify that kind of, because it's not actually a business, but I don't know how
Yes,
to.
it's yeah, but it was a job they were doing, right? It must not be a business. They were
Yeah.
on jobs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that's cyclical unemployment, because they didn't lose, they lost their jobs because the organizations, for example, if we are running an NGO and we had projects we used to carry out, and we have sponsors, we have US aid, we have sponsors from the US and other international organizations. It is on the strength of this financial support or donations that we are able to carry out the projects, consequently requiring workers or employees to execute the projects. Not so. Now, if
Mm-hmm.
the aid stops coming, can the projects hold? The answer is no. If there is no project, should we retain the workers? The answer
No.
definitely is obviously no. So you see, it is now the company, the organizations are downsizing or cutting down on workers because their number of projects or their funds are dropping. So it's a typical example of cyclical unemployment. Any questions? If we don't have a question, then we move to the concept of um, fiscal policy. Any questions or contribution? Any question or contribution?
Yeah, I wanted us to attempt the answer that the assignment, the food for thought for us about the American economy. Now, after going
Okay.
through all of this, I wanted us to attempt an answer. I might be wrong, but I'm looking at the American economy to fall under the cost push.
Okay. On what? Okay. Here's what I'll say. You need to have data, right? You need to
All
have
right,
grounds. We don't do guesswork. That is I was intentional about why I didn't ask us to to
all
to
right, all right.
to,
We need to.
to
Okay, it's an
decide it in this
assignment to go
class,
back and do.
because
All right,
yes, because you need to have data. You need to show us that based on my
to prove.
research, yes, based on my research, this is why I think that the
Okay,
US economy is facing cost push inflation. For example,
okay,
what um, what is the cost index? What's the production cost index on average in the US? Now, what is the consumer price index in the US, the CPI? And um, that is to help you understand whether if the consumer price index is it increasing or is it falling. Now, to what if it's increasing, to what extent is the CPI in the US increasing? Now, let us also look at the amount of circulation of money in the US economy. Is the standard of living of people in the US increasing or falling? Is the amount of money in the US increasing or falling? What macroeconomic objectives is the US government pursuing? Is the government pursuing expansionary policies or monetary policies, and why? When you understand what policies they are pursuing and why they are pursuing it, it gives you insight. So you discover that you're coming to say it's cost push inflation with with valid arguments, right? Are we together?
Yes, we are together.
All right. Let us look at fiscal policy. So I'm going to go fast. We're coming to the end of the class. So when we talk of fiscal policy, remember we looked at fiscal policy and we explained fiscal policy when we looked at when we're looking at the concept of demand and supply, and we saw the minimum price legislations and the maximum price legislation. That was a government fiscal policy. Fiscal. I remember taking time to explain the difference between fiscal, and monetary policies in that class. So what is government fiscal policy? FISCAL. What is government fiscal policy? A fiscal policy is how the government uses its expenditure and taxation to influence the economy. When we are talking of fiscal policy, we are looking at how the government uses the budget, uses its income and expenditure to be able to influence the economy as a whole. So the government uses fiscal policy to promote economic growth, to reduce unemployment, to control inflation, to stabilize the economy during recessions or during economic booms. Now, the government does this primarily by either budgeting for a surplus or budgeting for a deficit. If the government wants to achieve, say, economic growth, reduce unemployment, then the government is going to budget for a deficit. Why? Because if the government is budgeting for a deficit, let me write. Okay, so we have government income, which is represented by T, because primary source of government income is taxes. We have T greater than E, than expenditure. And also, if government taxes are greater than expenditure, it means that the government is receiving more money and its expenditure is less, meaning it is pumping less money into the economy. So the government is budgeting for a deficit. So this is for a deficit. So this is a situation of a surplus. A surplus, sorry about that. Because the government is receiving more money and spending less. The government is receiving more money and spending less, so this is a situation of a surplus. Now, the government, depending on the objectives it wants to achieve, might decide for its revenue to be less than its expenditure, meaning it's going to be spending more in the economy, and this is a situation of a deficit. Meaning it's going to be receiving less money, is going to reduce its taxes and increase its expenditure. This is a situation of a budget deficit. Then we also have a balanced budget where T is equal to E, where government revenue, government income is equal to government expenditure. Now, that brings us to the concept of expansionary and contractionary fiscal policy. When we talk of expansionary fiscal policy, we are simply referring to how the government uses the budget in order to boost the economy when the economy is slowing down or when the economy is in a recession. So we are talking of expansionary policy when the government wants to increase aggregate demand, when the government wants to boost economic growth, when the government wants to reduce unemployment. In this case, would the government budget for a deficit or for a surplus? Remember, we have said that expansionary fiscal policy is when the government wants, it's already even on the screen. Remember, we have said that the expansionary fiscal policy is used when the government wants to boost the economy, When the economy is slowing down and the government wants to remove the economy from a recession, the purpose is to increase aggregate demand, to boost economic growth and reduce unemployment. In this case, will the government budget for a deficit or for a surplus?
For a deficit.
Okay, thank you very much. The government is going to budget for a deficit, which means that the government is going to increase its spending, increase its expenditure. The government is going to, for example, the government is going to be building more roads, will be building more schools, more hospitals. The government will be creating more jobs. The government is going to be increasing unemployment benefits or stimulus checks. Is going to be increasing pensions. The government is going to be cutting income taxes so that households can have more money to spend. Meaning that maybe if income tax used to be 35%, the government can reduce income tax to maybe 25%. So that disposable income can increase and people should have more and more money to spend. So when the government wants to achieve economic growth, when the government wants to increase aggregate demand or reduce unemployment, the government will budget for a deficit by increasing its spending and reducing taxes. Now, contractionary fiscal policy is used when the economy is overheating, when the economy is facing high level of inflation. When the economy is facing high level of inflation. And the purpose of a contractionary fiscal policy is to reduce aggregate demand. So contractionary fiscal policy is the opposite of expansionary fiscal policy. So with expansionary fiscal policy, the government is trying to stimulate the economy. The government is trying to increase aggregate demand to boost economic growth, to reduce unemployment. But with contractionary fiscal policy, the government is rather trying to slow down the economy from a situation of overheating or high inflation. So the purpose of this is to reduce aggregate demand, to control inflation, or to slow down excessive economic growth. Remember that economic growth is important. Economic growth is desirable. But to what extent is economic growth desirable? Remember, we saw conflicting macroeconomic objectives in the previous lesson. We saw how trying to achieve a policy like economic growth also has negative consequences on the economy. For example, price instability. You cannot be seeking to achieve economic growth and achieving price stability at the same time. That was a problem. Not so. There are many other problems. You cannot be trying to achieve economic growth and at the same time you're achieving environmental protection. So economic growth is desirable. But now as an executive, to what extent is it desirable? So when the government is trying to slow down excessive economic growth, reduce aggregate demand, or control inflation in the economy, the government is going to budget for a surplus, which is a contractionary fiscal policy. So in this case, the government decreases its spending. The government is going to cut down on government spending on public projects like roads, schools, hospitals. The government is going to increase income taxes or sales taxes. The government is going to reduce welfare payments. The government is going to raise corporate taxes to reduce excessive investment in the economy. So maybe if corporate taxes was 20%, the government increases corporate taxes now to maybe 25% or 30%, so as to reduce excessive investment. So contractionary fiscal policy is simply the opposite of expansionary fiscal policy. Expansionary fiscal policy, like we said, is used when the economy is in a recession, when the economy is facing downtimes and the government wants to boost the economy. While contractionary fiscal policy is used when the economy is overheating, the economy is experiencing excessive economic growth and the government wants to slow down economic activity. Any question, comments? I think we overemphasized this in previous lessons. That's why. Any questions or comments? Questions or comments, please? Are we in class? Remember, if
Yes.
you're
Yes,
not
we are, Prof.
participating, if you're
Yes, we
not
are, Prof.
responding, this is a virtual class. Remember, class management in a virtual session is different from class management on site. I'm not seeing you. I don't know if you're following. I don't know if you're lost, if you understand. So from time to time, that's why there is a chat session. If you cannot talk, you should text, you should type. I should know that you're following the class. All right. Let us look at the fiscal multiplier. We have what we call the fiscal multiplier, which simply measures how much national income or the gross domestic product changes as a result of changes in government spending or taxation. Meaning that, remember we said that contractionary fiscal policy is used to slow down economic growth, to slow down economic activities, while expansionary policies, fiscal policies, are used to boost the economy when the economy is facing a recession. Now, if the government adopts a contractionary fiscal policy or an expansionary fiscal policy, how can they evaluate the success of this policy? If the government decides to adopt an expansionary fiscal policy, how can the government estimate the impact of this expansionary fiscal policy on the economy? How can the government decide or determine how effective the decision was? Now, how do we use the fiscal multiplier? If the government is adopting an expansionary fiscal policy, for example, let me give an example here. Okay, if the government is adopting an expansionary fiscal policy, so there is higher income for workers and firms, there is increased consumption, there is further rounds of spending, the chain continues, right? Because it's a multiplier. For example, if the government decides to increase its expenditure, it recruits more workers, it reduces taxes. On average, from previous lessons, from previous knowledge, we know that if the government adopts an expansionary policy, what will happen? There'll be more money in the economy. People's disposable incomes will increase. People who were not able to have jobs now have jobs. So on average, dependency ratio has fallen. People have more money. Disposable income has increased. Demand for goods and services has increased. Now, if the demand for goods and services increase, what will happen? There is higher income for workers. Consumption increases because people now have money, and now it becomes a circle, right? The chain continues. Because companies now make more profits. As they make more profits, they employ more people in order to increase production. More people have more money, so the chain continues. That's why it is called a multiplier. It's the fiscal multiplier. Now, the fiscal multiplier is simply 1 divided by 1 minus the marginal propensity to consume. In other words, let's put it in basic form. The fiscal multiplier is simply the change in the GDP, that is change in GDP divided by the change in government divided by the change in government spending. Let me abbreviate it as GE, government expenditure. So the fiscal multiplier is simply change in the gross domestic product divided by the change in government expenditure. For example, let's give an example. Let's assume that the government increases its expenditure by 100 million. let's assume that the government increases its expenditure by 100 million and the GDP, the gross domestic product of the country, increases by 300 million. Then what is the multiplier? It means that the multiplier is 3. How do we obtain that? Let me wipe. If we have government expenditure, that is GE, increasing by 100, let's assume $100 million, so that it should be a lot of money. By 100 million, this in millions, by $100 million, and let us assume that the gross domestic product, GDP, increases by $300 million. So what is our fiscal multiplier? Our fiscal multiplier is simply the change in GDP, which in this case is $300 million, not so, divided by the change in government expenditure, which in this case is $100 million, not so. So what is our fiscal multiplier? Our fiscal multiplier is 3. So this means that for every $1 of government spending, gross domestic product increases by $3. As simple as that. It means that for every $1 that the government spends in the economy is boosted 3 times. The economy is boosted by $3. If the fiscal multiplier is maybe 1.5, then it simply means that, by way of interpretation, that for every $1 that the government spends or pumps into the economy is boosted or increases by $1.5. So it therefore means that if the greater the fiscal multiplier, the more attractive it is for the government to pump money into the economy. Let's assume, for example, it's just like when we looked at the concept of price elasticity of demand and supply, right? Let's assume that we have a high fiscal multiplier and the government wants to achieve economic growth. If the government wants to achieve, can I clean the board?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, you can. But
Okay.
this, sir, this fiscal
Yes,
multiplier
please.
is shaking my head a bit.
Okay, I'm still explaining. Let me get done and then maybe you have a better understanding. Is that okay?
Okay.
All right. So I'm saying that the fiscal multiplier measures to what extent the economy changes. Oh my. Please excuse me a moment. Hello? Can you hear me, please?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I can
All
hear
right.
you.
I'm sorry, I had a call that came in, so I had to let the person know that I'm in class and that
Yes, we can hear
I'll be
you.
wrapping up. Okay. So I was explaining that the fiscal multiplier simply tells us to what extent the government's choice of a contractionary or an expansionary policy is successful. Now, we explained that the fiscal multiplier is the change in the gross domestic product divided by the change in the government's spending. And I was trying to explain that the higher the fiscal multiplier, the more likely the government is encouraged to chase an expansionary policy. Let us assume that the government wants to achieve economic growth. The government wants to stimulate the economy. And we have a fiscal multiplier as high as 4. It means that, by way of interpretation, it means that for every 1 franc FCFA, it means that for every 1 franc that the government pumps into the economy, be it through creating more jobs, be it through reducing taxes, be it through subsidization of firms, construction of roads, and all the actions the government can take in order to spend money, to pump money into the economy. As far as fiscal policy is concerned, for every 1 franc that the government pumps into the economy, the government achieves a 4 francs increase in economic activities. Are we understanding? It means that for every 1 franc that is pumped into the economy, the effect is a 4 francs increase in economic activity, because the multiplier is high. In this case, the government is going to be motivated to chase the economic growth. But now, in a case where maybe the fiscal multiplier is low, let's assume that the fiscal multiplier is just 1.5. The government, in order to boost the economy, might decide to chase other strategies, not fiscal policy. Meaning that if the government is spending, say 100, or let's call the money in Cameroon the way we call it in Cameroon. Let's say the government pumps 500 billion into the economy, and maybe at the end of the year, the fiscal multiplier is only 1.5, meaning that at the end of the year, the gross domestic product will only increase by how much? By 750 billion or so. The government might see it to be low, so the government might decide to chase other strategies of boosting the economy rather than chasing the fiscal policy. But now, let us assume that the fiscal multiplier is high. We have a fiscal multiplier of 3 or a fiscal multiplier of 4. The government now becomes motivated. Okay, for every 500 billion that we pump into the economy, the gross domestic product can increase by 2,000 billion, meaning that the fiscal multiplier is 4. So for every 500 billion that is pumped into the economy, the gross domestic product of the country increases by 2,000 billion. So the government now becomes motivated to chase an expansionary fiscal policy. But if the fiscal multiplier is low, the government might decide to chase a monetary policy. Are we on the same page? Is it understood? Any question? We've come to the end of the class. Any question? Any question, please? Question or comment? Madam Maureen.
Yes, sir.
Any questions?
No, sir. So I just wanted to say something. I want to see if I really understand this fiscal multiplier. So it is just a measure of how the GDP of a country changes due to changes in the government taxation or spending power. Is that it?
Exactly.
Thank you, sir.
So if the government decides to let's say, if the government is chasing an expansionary policy to achieve full employment, like we mentioned, if the government creates, I think sometime last year the government launched something, Operation 1,000 jobs, something like that, or it was year before last. Now, let us look at this. The government employs 1,000 people, right? How much is the government paying these 1,000 people? Let's do a rough math. Let's assume 1,000 people times an average salary of, let's say, 200,000, right? That gives us 200 million francs that the government has to pay as salaries every month. Not so. Now, this is one way the government is pumping money into the economy. So 200 million times 12 months, it means that in order to fulfill this particular project of Operation 1,000 people employed, the government is going to pump 2.4 billion into the economy within the year 2025 or 2026. Are we understanding? Now, after pumping this 2.4 billion into the economy, now the government also might have to reduce taxes here and there. The government may have to construct roads, hospitals, and all those other things. If the total amount of money the government is pumping into the economy goes up to, let's say, 10 billion francs, to what extent will the gross domestic product overall of the country increase as a result of this 10 billion that has been pumped into the economy? When you divide the change in the gross domestic product by the change in the government spending, then it gives you the fiscal multiplier. It gives you the extent to which the economy responds to changes in government spending. Is it better understood?
So in essence is that, for example, if the GDP of Cameroon right now is, let me say, 20 billion, and the government pumps in 10 billion, and then over a year the GDP becomes like 40 billion. It means there's like a 3, the multiplier is now 3, because from 20 million to like 40 million or 50 million, it means that the GDP has increased like 3 times from what it was.
Yes. And now, why is, just like we studied, you were not in that class, but just like we studied the importance of price elasticity of demand, we said the value of price elasticity of demand for a businessman or the government, knowing whether a good or service is fairly elastic in demand or fairly inelastic in demand, helps the government and business people in making decisions. Not so. The fiscal multiplier is important in helping the government also to make the decision on whether a fiscal policy is necessary or important or not. Because let's assume that the GDP of Cameroon is, say, 500 billion, and now the government pumps 100 billion into the economy, and the GDP of the country increases from 500 billion to, let's say, 550 billion. What is the fiscal multiplier in this case? Let me write down. So we have government GDP has increased from 500 billion to 550 billion also. So the increase in GDP is 50 billion, while the increase in government spending was how much? Was 100 billion. What is the multiplier in this case? The fiscal multiplier in this case is only 0.5.
0.5.
Should the government use, if the government has this figure, will you advise the government, if you're an economic advisor, will you advise the government as this is the right time to use an expansionary fiscal policy?
No, sir.
The answer is no, because we are pumping more money into the economy, but the effect on the gross domestic product overall is very low. It's not even up to how much we have pumped into the economy. Now, if maybe the government expenditure, if maybe the GDP increased from 500 billion to, let's say, 650 billion. So what is the change in GDP? 150 billion. How much did the government spend? 100 billion. What's the new price? What's the new fiscal multiplier? The new fiscal multiplier is 1.5. Now, even though the fiscal multiplier is 1.5, which means that the GDP has risen higher than the money pumped into the economy, the government now will compare other strategies like monetary policies to see whether through alternative strategies the government can achieve a better result than just a 1.5 increase. So the government now look at monetary policies, which we are going to see in the next class. Instead of chasing an expansionary fiscal policy, should I instead chase an expansionary monetary policy? Which one will be more advantageous? Which one will yield better results? Is that better understood?
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Recording stopped.